Have you ever noticed that Whiterun looks strikingly similar to Edoras, capital of Rohan? Lately, I've been rewatching the series for like the 1000th time, and seeing Edoras got me thinking, how much do Whiterun and Edoras really have in common? Is it just the city design, or is there more to it? By the way, even though those movies came out over 20 years ago, they're still some of the best in their genre, right? Do you ever go back to them? Alright, let's dive in and break down these cities. What's up with their locations, their leaders, and all the little details that make them feel so connected? Is the connection just in their appearance? Let's find out. Let's start with the most obvious connection, the location and design. I dive into each one separately, so we can compare them in more detail. First, let's look at Edoras. It's perched on a hill overlooking the vast plains of Rohan. That's not just for the view, even though that's such an amazing view. It's a strategic choice. Being on a hill provides a huge advantage. You can spot enemies from miles away, giving you time to prepare. Plus, any army trying to attack has to put in extra effort just to get close, while defenders can strike from above, whether with arrows or, some clever diplomacy from the king's seat. The city is surrounded by a wooden palisade that blends into the landscape, adding an extra layer of defense. At the very top sits Medusat, the Golden Hall. Now, let's swing over to Whiterun. Like Edoras, Whiterun also sits high on a hill, rising above the plains of Skyrim. The advantages are the same: a commanding view, easier defense, and a sense of control over the region. Instead of wooden walls though, Whiterun surrounded by a solid stone wall, but the goal's still the same. Keep the bad guys out, whether they're bandits, stormcloaks, or even dragons. At the heart of Whiterun stands Dragon's Reach, which reminds me of Medusat. Dragon's Reach towers over the city, just like Medusat does over Edoras. They might not look exactly the same, but both are beautifully designed fortresses. Take a look at both cities from a distance. Don't they look quite similar? The layered structure of buildings with Dragon's Reach and the Golden Hall sitting at the top, surrounded by mountains. Even the open fields around them have a similar vibe. I've always liked Whiterun a lot. Maybe that's the reason. It really reminds me of Edoras, the beautiful city from one of my favorite fantasy worlds. Now, let's talk about the guys in charge. First up is Theoden, king of Rohan. His story is all about redemption and resilience. At first, he's under Saruman's corrupting influence, weakened and unable to lead effectively. But with Gandalf's help, he finds his strength, steps up as a heroic leader, and rallies his people against the forces of evil. His comeback is a standout moment in The Lord of the Rings, showing that even in the darkest times, a leader can find the strength to fight back. Next, let's check out Jarl Balgruuf of Whiterun. Doesn't he kind of look like Theoden? The blonde, wavy hair, the beard, and really, the whole face. And check out the crowns, both have a red gemstone at the center. It's easy to miss since Theoden's gem is pretty small. The resemblance between these two is huge, don't you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts. While Balgruuf's story doesn't involve any dramatic transformations, he still faces huge challenges. Whiterun is caught in the middle of Skyrim's civil war, with both the Empire and Stormcloaks fighting for control. And on top of that, there's the persistent threat of Alduin, the world-eating dragon. Balgruuf has to handle these political and existential threats while keeping his city safe. Both Theoden and Balgruuf face crises that test their leadership. King of Rohan deals with the external threat of Saruman and the internal struggle of overcoming his weakened state. After finding redemption, he faces the army of Sauron. Balgruuf, on the other hand, tackles external threats including the civil war and the threat of Alduin. Despite their different battles, they both represent resilience and the heavy burden of leadership during tough times. Now, let's dive into the cultural connections between these two cities. Edoras is deeply intertwined with horse culture. The buildings have horse heads carved into the roofs, and the carvings and banners inside Medusat prominently feature horse motifs. This highlights the central role horses play in Rohan's way of life. For the Rohirrim, horses symbolize freedom, strength, and their close bond with the land. In Whiterun, although it's known for its Nordic vibe, there is also a noticeable appreciation for horses. Look close closely and you'll spot horse emblems on city banners and even on the guard shields. This could be a nod to Scandinavian influences, or perhaps an intentional link to Edoras and its horse-centric culture. However, Whiterun's primary symbols are dragons. Dragon heads adorn the rooftops of houses, and a massive dragon head is mounted on the wall above the Jarl's throne. While horses are important in Whiterun, dragons represent the city's strength and ancient heritage, contrasting with Edoras' focus on horse symbolism. The dragon motifs might reflect Whiterun's unique character, blending its Nordic roots with its own legends and traditions. Let's circle back to those dragon head carvings on the rooftops for a sec. After digging into it more, it turns out there is a nice variety of designs, which is pretty cool. For instance, check this one out, it's on Carlada's house. But while I was exploring, I stumbled on something even more interesting, a horse head. Yep, the Banneret mare in Whiterun has horse heads carved on the roof. How cool is that? So both Whiterun and Edoras feature horses on their banners and shields. But wait, shields? You might be thinking, aren't the classic Rohan shields pretty plain? And you'd be right, the standard shield is fairly simple. But then I came across a more decorated one. Turns out it's King Theoden's shield, which explains the fancy design. But here's where it gets even more interesting. In this scene, if you look closely, you'll notice something else. This shield has a partial ring design, and at the ends, are those two horse heads? And later, when we get a clearer view of Eowyn's shield during her fight with the Nazgul, the design is slightly different, but here you can definitely see two horse heads. And how about this one? Looks like an entire horse to me. This shield looks pretty nice too. So, what do you make of all these horse connections? Could it be intentional to give Whiterun more of an Edoras vibe? It kind of feels like it, right? I mean, dragons are Whiterun's real symbol, so you'd expect to see more dragons on their banners and shields, not horses. Quick question, have you ever noticed how some names in Rohan start with EO? Like Eowyn, Eomer, and then there's Jorlund Greymane in Whiterun. Plus, the first king of Rohan was named Jarl. Is this just a coincidence, or could there be more to it? It makes me wonder if these little connections are intentional nods between the worlds, or if it's just fantasy writers following similar naming conventions. And speaking of characters, what about Eowyn and Adrian? I know what you're thinking. How can you compare Eowyn, the beautiful warrior, to Adrian with her tough Nordic look? But hear me out. Even though Eowyn and Adrian have different roles, they both represent strength and resilience in their respective worlds and support their leaders. Eowyn helps her uncle and King Theoden and fights bravely, even defeating the Witch King of Angmar, the most powerful of the Nazgul. Adrian, on the other hand, supports her father, Proventus, who serves as the Jarl's steward at Dragon's Reach. So, she advises an advisor, as she mentions in one of her dialogues. And in fantasy settings, it's common for skilled blacksmiths like Adrian to also be proficient fighters. So like Eowyn, she might be a great warrior. And maybe they don't look that similar, but hey, at least they're both blonde. Wait a minute, Eowyn's got a big smile here, while Adrian always looks a bit serious. Let's swap out Eowyn's picture for one without the smile. How about now? Much better, right? Now they look more alike. Okay, so I know this one isn't directly connected to Edoras, but the similarity is just too big not to mention. In The Lord of the Rings, the White Tree of Gondor is a powerful symbol of the kingdom's legacy and hope. It's withered and dying, reflecting the fading strength of Gondor. But when Aragorn becomes king, the tree is restored, symbolizing the renewal of the kingdom. Now, in Whiterun, we've got the Gildergreen. It's an ancient tree that used to be a sign of divine favor from Kinareth. Like the White Tree, it's seen better days. But, through a side quest, the Dragonborn can restore it, much like Gondor's White Tree, symbolizing a return to grace and vitality for Whiterun. By the way, did you know there are two ways to solve the Gildergreen quest? One option is to take sap from the Elderglim, which restores the old tree in Whiterun. However, this method involves killing the Elderglim, dealing with Spriggans, and potentially causing deaths in the cave. But there is a way to avoid all of that. After accepting the quest, you can talk to Maurice in the Temple of Kinareth. He wants to join you to see the ancient tree. When you arrive, he's shocked to learn you plan to harm the Elderglim and offers an alternative. He prays to the tree and receives a new sapling, which you can then take back to Danica. This way, nobody has to die and Whiterun gets a new tree to grow. So yeah, Whiterun and Edoras are definitely more than just similar looking cities and hills. From their design and defenses to their leadership struggles and cultural symbols, these two cities share some remarkable similarities. But do you think it's intentional or is it just a coincidence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want me to compare other cities or explore more gaming worlds beyond Skyrim, just let me know. I'm always up for exploring more connections and finding secrets.